Okay, we'll go back to the point about the ASEAN Amity and Cooperation Pact. We'll get the technical terms from you, Mr. Ambassador. This is the China-Philippines or Philippines-China focus segment. And we'd like to focus on an article that appeared in Rappler and some other publications from Aaron Rabena, who is a Filipino masteral or doctoral student now in Shandong University. And the title is What a Duterte Government Means for Sino-Philippine Relations. It's a quite a lengthy article with very extensive research. And basically, I highlighted a few things here. The change of leadership, meaning with the entry of the Duterte government, and diplomatic awareness could plausibly herald a major detente or a rapprochement, am I pronouncing it correctly, Mr. Ambassador, in Philippines-China relations. And he says, functional cooperation through joint oil development and direct bilateral negotiations, the Deng Xiaoping model, maybe the president has expressed openness, the incoming president Duterte has expressed openness to this approach. And he has a segment entitled Great Rejuvenation of Philippines-China Relations, ? However, some segments of society, expectedly, like Roy Logoles has reacted very negatively, which I had to answer too. But you've read this article. Then let's discuss the merits of this article. But before we go into that, please expand on that Amity and Cooperation Pact. So we are introduced to this.
Well, I'd like to start with the background, approach to ASEAN, since this was in the late 1990s. And our tack was to promote an ASEAN-China Declaration of Conduct. Well, actually, it was originally a code of conduct, but it became a bit of a difficult sailing. In the end, what was adopted by ASEAN-China was a declaration of conduct. Now, we had a proposal for the direction of the code of conduct. I don't know if this will take too much time in this explanation, but I was always against it for the simple reason that a code of conduct for countries in the region does not sit well or does not speak well of the relationship between next-door neighbors that has had a millennia of peaceful relations and harmonious relationships from before. And now we are going to a code of conduct simply because we have a dispute there. No, I don't think that's necessary, especially in light of so many already international instruments prescribing a customary and conventional conduct of states in handling disputes. So a code of conduct is not necessary, and more than that, it does not speak well that between close maritime neighbors, we need one,
Yeah.
Now,
can you recall what instigated this proposition to have these rules on conduct and so on?
Well, okay, if I may say so, because I don't want to second guess who were there before. That was before my time. It seems to be a nice way to go, except that I do not see how it went that way ultimately. Because if you go to ASEAN, as an organization, what would come to mind is what role can ASEAN play in handling the disputes? What would come to mind only is that under the UN Charter, there is such a thing as Chapter 8 on regional organizations, which ASEAN is. And these regional organizations can, if they wish, have a first call on settling disputes under Chapter 8 of the UN Charter. Now, the thing is, ASEAN as a regional organization, it is an economic grouping. It is not designed to handle political issues. But as later on, so perhaps in that early stage we can say that, but that was probably a good thing to go then. But now, since 2010, at the start of the present government administration, there has been an amended protocol to the ASEAN Treaty of Amity and Cooperation that highlights Article 7 about peaceful settlement process under ASEAN. And the thing that comes to my attention very strongly is in the ASEAN Treaty of Cooperation, it does not talk about peace and security. It talks about peace and harmony. And that is what brings me to the point of Vince about our philosophical roots, you know, which we must go back to and nurture. You know?
And then, am I correct if I say that harmony is a product of communication and achieving understanding?
Yes.
It is not imposition of this and that, conditions and so on.
And consensus.
And it is consensus.
Yes.
Harmony is consensus. Vince?
Well, there's a famous Chinese philosopher. His name was Shang Yang. He conceptualized that the greatest unifying element that we could actually have in a local domain is the law. But then when it comes to international relations, it's a different thing.
That's right.
You cannot impose that this culture should be tied with this other culture. It's not a matter of legality.
Yes.
It's a matter of respect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, in a local setting, everybody falls under a set of rules and laws.
Yeah.
But between sovereign states,
Yes.
that's another matter. They have a set, that's why they're sovereign. Every
Yes.
country is sovereign. They cannot be subjected to a unilateral set of rules and laws.
Yes.
And that's why I think it is a tradition in international relations that is the ultimate
Yes. Code of
method
conduct.
of
Yes.
resolution.
That's right. Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, Mr. Laurel, because really relating it to the big issue between in ASEAN and ASEAN-China and the South China Sea, it has to do with arbitration. Now, traditionally, you cannot impose arbitration on another sovereign state. But let's put it this way: the international community had experiments on imposing rule of law on an international basis, which so far had a gap in regard to enforcement action. And so, after the First World War and the failure of the League of Nations, it was felt that the ideal still is if there can be enforcement action, maybe under the UN, that could sort of implement, you say, international judgments. That's under the UN Charter. It's a different way of enforcement. But again, looking at that ideal of supranational authority, under the Love the Sea Convention, there is an experiment there to bring compulsory arbitration against another party to the UNCLOS. But the problem there is, okay, maybe it's good to try as an experiment, but should we try that for ourselves and when we don't know what could be the repercussions? I mean, it is not a matured procedure, and we waded into it, prodded by the principal author of the Love the Sea Convention, which is the United States of America, which is not a party to
That's
the
right.
convention.
That's the irony of the situation there.
Exactly. So about the arbitration, again, if you look at the third philosophy that Vince was talking, yeah, maybe that could work.
Yeah.
But it is an experiment. But if we look at our own Asian way, or even ASEAN way, as we call it, I'm not sure it will work.
Yeah. I'll go to Vince, but I have to bring up this very, very fundamental point. Only in these times, and maybe I really want the reaction of the two. First, you as an international law expert, and as a political philosopher. Why this concept of lawfare, warfare using law, came up? Ano? That, to me, is a distortion of the purposes of law. You institute law to resolve problems, but not for the purposes of war. The very term lawfare is associated with warfare, but with legal, using legal provisions and so on. As a legal a student of law, international law, what's your reaction to this?
I don't want to respond to it as a student of international law, but more of international relations.
Yes, yes.
Now, from whom do you hear this, mantra of a rules-based order?
Yeah.
World,
Order,
for the world,
yeah, for the world, yeah.
It's from the United States of America. Now, let me say again that if I mention the United States, it's because it is the big player, not because I hate the United States. I always say, when I tell my students, America is doing everything right for itself. Okay, so no criticism on what the U.S. is doing. Now, rule of law is practically a modern ideology of the not modern. This the first public pronouncements of this was way back the time of President Kennedy, when I was just a pre-law student. You know, a world rule of law, and the latest pronouncement and description of that is Hillary Clinton when he visited Manila as Secretary of State. The rule of law is to preserve American supremacy and dominance. So in short, there's nothing philosophical there. We need the rule of law to maintain the world status, the present status quo in the world, wherein America is the #1 power.
Yeah.
So they need a legal framework, as they call it, in order to maintain the status quo. No rule of law there, no philosophical aspect.
Okay, let's listen to Vince, and then I'll bring up one aspect. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go back to Xiangyang.
Yeah.
Xiangyang idealized a...
Xiangyang is a philosopher.
Yeah, Chinese philosopher
Okay.
during the period of Warring States. He idealized two concepts of imposing power, the technical way and the creative way. In the technical aspect, he said, he argued, the law can actually be used to establish order, but it has limits. He actually called it the politics of law. Here's where the United States enters. But then he said, this should be used to maintain order when it's no longer being effective when it comes to maintaining order in an international scale. For instance, you have to resort to the other,
Which is the creative.
which is the creative. That's when you go back to your roots. That's when you try to set aside the legalities, technicalities, imposition of laws, and just go back to your cultural orientation. That we can actually maintain harmony. We can actually maintain a good relationship by respect. By I think their virtues were Ren, Yi, Li, and Shin. Which means is yung benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and trustworthiness. That's the reason I was highlighting earlier. This Eastern way of thinking, it's society oriented, society centered, relationship based.
Yes.
So that's where the creative aspect of the Xiangyang principle enters. So I am in agreement with sir that at points it has limitations.
This is where I bring in this aspiration of non-aligned countries, which has an old tradition going back to the 1950s, a non-aligned movement with Nehru and so on, Sukarno, to the modern effort at this, which is the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China. If we can flash that image of BRICS again on the screen. And this is the point, we go back to Dilma Rousseff of Brazil. She's saying that she is being deposed. Actually, literally, I think she's saying she's being deposed by the Americans. In her own words, creation of BRICS really scared some countries. Of course, this is diplomatess. Some countries really is the U.S.
Yeah.
And the U.S., there's a latest news item that they're also doing the same thing in Bolivia. And of course, we have seen what has happened in Argentina, Venezuela. They go to the extent of manipulating the oil price in order to depress the economy of Venezuela. Yes.
But don't forget Cuba.
And Cuba, of course, they had this normalization of relations. How normal is it?
Yeah.
The embargo has not yet been removed. You know, the economic embargo against Cuba. Why did Cuba agree? Maybe we can have a session analyzing that. You know, yeah. Anyway, we're coming close to the end of our show, but
Well, I would say that again, I'm a lawyer. I took postgraduate studies in international law and love the sea. But after 36 years of work in the Department of Foreign Affairs, the last thing I would do is invoke the law, because law is always invoked by big powers to suit their direction. But so talking about what's happening to Brazil, where is Brazil? Brazil is in America.
that's right. Yeah.
South America, and that is the area which America wants to be sanitized for itself. Now, I am a bit, passionate about this because we come to our area. Let's leave America. We come to our area. We have China, who has been with us for thousands of years and interacting with us for thousands of years. And China merely wants to recover its sphere of influence in the South China Sea, and America won't allow it. You should. I think the language that America used in today's papers warning China, I think, is going too far. You know, I mean, it really shows condescension for Asians, if you have to say it.
Yeah. Vince, anything to add there?
Well, I think the concern that we need to address really is the perspective of the general populace. Well, the Filipinos are very inclined to adopting or believing instant information and superficialities. To them, what's clear is that China is already at our doorstep. They have already an attempt to, for some, invade the Philippines. That's what they see. They don't, the general
But
population.
that's greatly created by the mainstream media. You know?
Exactly.
As you were saying, in some TV channels, morning and night, they're reminded of the so-called invasion of the Philippines by China, which has never happened in Philippine-China history and
Can I
relations.
interject something on that? Because using the words China is at our doorstep, it always has been.
It will always be. We're neighbors.
Yes, and but in the early part, they were at our doorstep in a very benign way, trading, and not invading us, for
That's
example.
right. And also enriching the country
Exactly.
through trade with the Sultan of Sulu, for example.
Yes.
And
Paduka
even
Pahal.
galleon trade
Yes.
consisted of tea, porcelain, and silk going to Acapulco.
Exactly.
Yeah, yes.
And now you have the One Belt, One Road, the new Silk Road, and the Maritime Silk Road, which we are denying ourselves. Which, by the way, in the coming weeks, we'll have former Rebel Colonel Victor Corpus join us to discuss this, because he has sent out a series of emails warning the Philippines about the danger of the American bases here under EDCA, and stating very clearly that in his assessment, China is not really concerned about the economic benefits in the South China Sea. It is concerned about the ideal depth of the South China Sea for American nuclear submarines, and they want to secure that. You know? It may not even be a sphere of influence. My own view is China is just thinking of its security because it has been invaded from the sea 450 times in its history.
Yes.
Remember how the Western imperial powers took over Shanghai, Hong Kong, the Japanese to Manchuria through the sea. You know? Anyway, we have our last 60 seconds. We'll go to our young friend and then to our senior expert.
Well, to me, we have to remind our people again of the glorious history of our friendship with China. In fact, our own national hero, tomorrow is Independence Day, our own national hero can trace his roots, paternal roots, back to Fukien. His great-great-grandfather was a native of the Fujian,
That's right.
of Fujian, named Domingo Lamco. If there is one thing I could say about China, it's that almost all Filipinos have blood relations as far as
Some heritage,
Chinese is
yeah.
concerned. And when it comes to the United States of America, here's one thing I could say. Almost all Filipinos have relatives who were raped or murdered during the Philippine-American War. So between the two, as far as history is concerned, I think we should not fear China. I think we should welcome their invitation for bilateral talks as one Asian community. I think it was Marcos who hit it on the spot when he said that the Philippines, our destiny is in Asia. Our destiny is with Asia.
Okay. Well, we've run out of time, so 30 seconds for our ambassador.
I just want to go back to what I said. The topic I want to pick up for my last word is the ASEAN summit next year. Let me repeat that I'm not speaking as an expert. I don't presume to advise President Duterte, but he must look at the flow of events now. The ASEAN-China Summit on September 17 in Vientiane, the Laos hosting of the summit, ASEAN Summit this year, and that has to be connected to our own hosting next year. This is very important, highlighted especially by the issue in the South China Sea.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have. So to Aaron Rabena, you have some answers here from our discussion on what a Duterte government means for Sino-Philippine relations. So until next week, have a good week ahead of you.